Hi everyone, it's Tiffany Iser and I'm going to go over using existing records and documents as a data collection tool. So one of the reasons why I was drawn to this data collection method and I want to know more about it is because I felt like it was connected to the action research I plan on doing. Since my students don't really use formative assessments and I can't do surveys or interviews with them, I'm actually looking to look at past progress that they've had in data collections we've used in the classroom. So I thought this would be a good area for me to focus on to see what are some strengths, weaknesses, and what kind of data can I get out of using this data collection method. So the first thing I want to go over before moving forward is so that we can have an understanding of exactly what is considered an existing record, document, and artifact is what are some examples of those things. So in our textbook, as well as in our other readings, existing records are typically the information the school already records and keeps on file. So some of the examples from Mills are attendance rates, retention rates, discipline rates. That could be discipline referrals, dropout rates, suspension rates, parent-teacher conference attendance rates. I know our school collects information on when all of us have conferences and then who attends. So that's already on file. Data by grade level for statewide assessments, standardized test scores, participation in extracurricular activities. Some artifacts are student portfolios that have student information already in them. Newsletters and curriculum information that you might have. These are all examples of existing records, documents, and artifacts that could be used in research. So the process and procedures for this data collection method are extremely simple since many of these records are already on file at the school. So one of the areas that teachers, researchers need to be aware of and cautious about is getting permission to use the information. Making sure that you ask to get access to that information and you have permission to do so is extremely important and ethical, as we've talked about in our previous modules. So beyond getting permission and identifying exactly what information you need to collect for your research, there are not really any other procedures that are in place to gather this information. So Mills stated that many of these data sources are naturally occurring and require only that teachers locate them within their school setting. Also that we can use this information that we've kind of just recorded and put on file to make changes and really turn it into data that we can use in our research to help our students and improve our teaching practices. So those are the processes and procedures. As I said, it's really simple because once you get access and permission to that information, there's nothing else you really need to do because it's already there for you. So the use of existing records, artifacts, and documents has elements of both qualitative and quantitative data, depending on what information you are collecting and analyzing. So for qualitative data, you can use observations, newsletters, and portfolios. And this information would answer questions involving people's feelings about the assessments, the curriculum, or the interventions. So a question would be like, what effect did your intervention have on student motivation? Mills stated on page 130 in our book that the teacher researcher could go through the student portfolio, gather information up on how the student felt about the assignment. So that's a little example of how it could be qualitative data using those previous records and assignments that we have in a portfolio. As for quantitative data, attendance records, standardized test scores, retention rates, other numerical data that we would have on file would be considered quantitative. So an example of a question for this type of data could be, what effect does the intervention have on student attendance rates? Or what effect does PBIS have on student behavior? And the teacher researcher would be able to analyze the number of absences students had during the intervention and before that, and then as well as the number of behavioral referrals the principal got before PBIS and then when that intervention was implemented to determine if it's showing a positive outcome or not. So if you're looking to do a mixed method research, this could provide you with both data. You could also just pool the data that you need and the information you need to answer your own research questions. So for the strengths and weaknesses, the strengths of this data collection method is that these records are easy to access once you have permission, and the school already has them because they already need to keep track of them. They can provide both qualitative and quantitative data. So if you're, like I said, looking to do a mixed method study, they provide both sets of data. You also don't have to have both sets. You can just pick what information you need. Also, the information that is collected in these records is typically monitored, and specific procedures are in place across schools in the district as well as schools within that state. So for me, I'm specifically thinking of attendance as an example, since that is monitored specifically, and it's either yes, the student was in, or no, they weren't. So that data could be easily gathered and would be reliable. So also in our reading, Dana stated, yet when teaching and inquiry are intertwined with one another, with little extra effort, papers become data and take on a new meaning. So I felt like this was really important to include, since that is a strength of these records. Instead of them just being filed away, we can use them and make new meaning to come up with trends, to find out how to change our instruction and what interventions can be used for a positive impact on students. So some weaknesses that came to mind were that you need to select the appropriate resources to use and organize those materials. Sometimes that can be hard, gathering the information and organizing it how it needs to be so that it benefits your research. I also found that your school, depending on what they have on record, could be a limitation, because if they don't have that information on record, it's missing. So there could be information that you're looking to use that's missing. It could also be a limitation or a weakness to this data collection method if what they have is not completely accurate, or you don't have control as the researcher over what that information is, which is going to also lead into one of my concerns. So my concerns with this data collection method, I want to first talk about validity and reliability that we read about, just to go over what exactly we're looking for when it comes to our resources being valid and reliable. So validity is making sure that the overall contact coverage, so surveys, checklists, are measuring what they're intending to measure. So that's meaning that they're a valid measure. So they're measuring exactly what you want. There's not other information on it that shouldn't be. Reliability is referring usually to the consistency of data collected. So for example, if you keep getting different results each time, usually your results are not considered reliable. If you do continue to get the same results or similar results, your instrument or tool that you're using to collect data would be considered reliable. So I do have a few concerns with quantitative sources of data. Like I said, some of them, such as like the attendance and standardized assessments, these are reliable resources because many of them are already in place, and they're used because they need to be accurate. Some of the concerns I do have are things like I spoke about on the last slide, about missing information and the bias that we could have that's out of the researcher's control. The last thing I have is just that some of the information, when we're doing qualitative sources, that it could be not reliable or valid. The information could be subjective, so we really need to make sure that we are checking to make sure what we're doing is reliable and valid. And then ethically, as long as the data is aggregated, I don't really see potential risks since the information is already collected and being used. So that's all I have for existing records, documents, and artifacts. Please feel free to ask any questions if you have any questions about using this data collection method. And then these are just my resources. Thank you.